how do you think that your Black identity shapes the way that you see safety in your community and then also gun violence? We previously discussed that briefly.
I think for me, like a part of my Black identity is strength in numbers and feeling at home when I see my people, when I'm with my family. So, like when I think of safety and what it means to me, deep within my community, I have people who look like me, who are around me, who are sometimes like-minded, sometimes not when it comes to the same topics. But just know that we're trying to push what's best for our people in our community. And again, sorry, could you repeat the last part of the question about gun violence?
Yeah, how do you think that your Black identity helped shape your view and the way that you see gun violence?
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes to spaces like media, music, and when we see where Black people, Black artists are occupying these spaces, they're often brought alongside with criminalization sometimes, where there's lots of drug culture, promiscuity, and guns sometimes, whether it be in music videos and films. And oftentimes that can be like the bulk of what general people as a whole consume of Black people. And that's how stereotypes get ensued and how they stay within our community. So I think for me, being able to like be a young Black man in America walking around, be able to take away from that identity, take away from, oh, automatically a young Black man is a thug. He's involved with such material that would be like this and that is bad, and just like reframing what it means to be Black, reframing that we're not a monolith and that we all have separate identities. And that's kind of how intersectionality works, with where you come from and how that influences how you act, how you see their different things. Like my experience will never be the same as yours, nor Chagai's, nor anybody else on this Zoom, because we're all different, but we can relate in the identity that we are all Black, and we do share some similarities with that.
Yes, I strongly agree with that. I think that for me personally, growing up Black, it used to be something that I was more embarrassed of, and now it is something that I encourage other people to embrace. And I embrace that part of my identity because I didn't grow up seeing people that looked like me and do like positions that were powerful. And when I got to visit my family members who were African American, a lot of them were often either involved with a lot of negative activities such as drugs, such as deteriorated deteriorated lives because of the fact that gun violence is such a prevalent issue, specifically from Detroit, Michigan. And I was always told, never forget who you are or where you came from. And that always has kind of stuck with me too, because I just learned that protection isn't purely just about the weapons, but it's also about the people around you. And that's why we need to have less guns, because these are the people that we want to protect. And that's why I personally care a lot about changing the culture around guns, just like you, though, because I think that a lot of safety shouldn't just feel like support, and it shouldn't feel like survival, but it should feel like everybody is supported and everybody has the same experience, and that's why we all need to like work together in order to fight for these causes. And then additionally, um, in addition to your work to Project Unloaded, does anyone do any other active community service or community participation in prevention work? And what have you learned from those experiences?
Um, when I was in high school, I did a lot of like substance abuse prevention work. So, encouraging high school students, middle school students, etc., just giving them early exposure to that using substances isn't necessary and that we should stray away from that track because it can result in a lot of other external effects. And I think similarly, substance abuse work and gun violence prevention work address sort of the same issue of breaking stigma, so destigmatizing, and then also educating people, and then from there advocating for people. So I think working in those two fields has helped me realize that like the root of this the root of these issues a lot of the time is education and closing gaps. And especially as someone within the Black community, I think there's often so many gaps that are filled by stereotype and filled by stigma that it doesn't allow us to engage in these conversations about our communities and how to better shape them. And being able to be a part of those conversations and lead them has allowed me to better understand that education is the root of how we can solve these issues and connect communities opposing from separating them.
Okay, so I'm a part of an organization called Hartford Communities That Care, specifically the Greater Hartford Youth Leadership Academy. So essentially what we do is basically we study social issues inside of our communities, whether that's mental health, preventing substance abuse and addiction, and or just violence and trauma, and a multitude of others. And then we present about those issues at our annual summit. So I learned that multiple voices are a lot greater than one, especially when it comes to being still youth. And to be frank, not to come off as rude or anything of the sort, but people don't really want to hear a lot of the, I won't say older. I'm trying to find a different word. Hmm. I'm going to say older because less youthful sounds insane. So older people's voices to, I'd say, advocate for our communities because those are the voices that we have been hearing for the past, I can't even say how many decades. So just being able to come together as youth and kind of make a change is, I say it's powerful. And having other people find the power in that is extremely important.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of connect back to Aisha's point. In in college currently where I'm at right now, I worked with our RSVP center, which is like resources for sexual violence and sexual assault, like among that. And essentially what I did was I was presenting presentations to the incoming freshmen so that they can know about the resources. And something that I learned from that is sometimes like things can be relevant during our time, things can be happening all around us, but conversations are not happening within groups of people. And I think it was important for me to take that opportunity to discuss with these freshmen because a lot of them have never had in-depth talks about what sex looks like, what consent looks like, how to establish boundaries within like your up and coming college career. And I think with that, what I've been able to gain is uncomfortability is a real thing. And that is sometimes, unfortunately, what inhibits people from wanting to speak up about certain things, wanting to learn more, because the way that we grow up, we view certain things as wrong. Someone might grow up around guns and say, oh, they're wrong, they kill people, but they never want to talk more about it. They never maybe want to get involved because that's just the length of which they're willing to go to. That's why we kind of have to like break into these, not break into the wrong word, but come into these spaces and be able to have these challenging conversations, be able to allow that awkward silence to be there, but just to push the notion that it is going to be uncomfortable. Bad things are going to be present, but in order to propel the movement, in order to create safety, conversations need to be had and actions need to be done.
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. And like, I think another part of this work is coming to everything with an open mind because you don't know what people's experiences are or what experiences they've had with gun violence. Like, I've lived in a very predominantly white neighborhood. I've also lived in a very predominantly black neighborhood, and my experiences with gun culture and gun violence looked almost drastically different, but I think there were still the same problems at the root. But it takes conversation and it takes understanding to realize that these are just the same problem in two different forms. And I think a lot of times the experience of someone in a predominantly black community can go unnoticed or can go misunderstood compared to the experience of someone in a predominantly white community that's experiencing gun violence. So I think that's sometimes an aspect of it that isn't always reviewed, but I think it adds a lot of context when you understand the environment in which someone came up in and the way that gun violence or gun culture might have been introduced to them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Um, in fact, I have an experience like, I mean, with being at a predominantly white school and a predominantly black school. And when someone brought a gun to my school when I was in around middle school, which was predominantly black, it was not talked about whatsoever. There weren't conversations about it, prevention or support. Although nothing did happen, it was the fact that someone had done that and had brought something to a learning environment where the only thing kids were trying to do were just learning. And it's kind of I want to say, I don't know what word. I want to say crazy. I don't know if I should say crazy or hectic that people don't often advocate for less gun violence on school campuses, specifically school campuses. In fact, we have a national reputation for having school shootings and for having gun violence in our schools. And it's quiet and it's like brushed past. And I think that's just genuinely an insane thing because no other country has this. And if there is a situation in other countries, there's legislation, there's support, there's people talking about it, but that's not in America whatsoever. And I feel like it's just specifically in marginalized communities and schools that have a lot of people of color there, it's just normalized instead of addressed. And the safety is often treated very differently. And the silence is just as harmful as the violence itself. At least that's been my experience. And that's part of why I personally care a lot about this work, because people, no matter what skin color, no matter what race, no matter what gender, deserve prevention and protection.
Yeah, I think also too, like when we look at Black and Brown communities, a lot of the times the mental health resources and support for youth, whether that be outside of school or in school, aren't always there. And we're always talking about the result of that issue, but never the root of it. And I think if there were more opportunities for students to get involved and fall out of that constant loop of get engaging in violence, we would be having less conversations like these. And a lot of times in advocacy for Black and Brown communities, that's not the main conversation being had.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I believe that we can balance this out by remembering that this violence isn't just an issue. It's real people's lives being affected. And often when we read a lot of things that are happening on the news, we're so disassociated from the fact that these are real people getting affected and how pictures are more caring and people tend to care more about the pictures than reading the statistics were far worse. And I think that there is urgency because the harm is real and it's currently happening. But there has to be care because so many people carry trauma that is connected to it. And like you say, we don't advocate enough for people like this. And I try to speak honestly about the seriousness of gun violence without reducing communities to statistics or stereotypes, although it often feels intercorrelated. And I need to go about a better way of dealing with that. And alongside that, sorry, no, no, go, go, go.
I just had a question for you guys, like in terms of like seeing representation in spaces like this, like spaces like advocacy and prevention. Like I feel like for me, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but a lot of times in advocacy spaces, especially for Black and Brown communities, sometimes I feel like I don't see us at the forefront of the conversations, and we're more like a lot of times it's people who don't look like us who are leading these conversations and don't and especially like have that experience. And for me that's something I've had to sort of grasp, that like not a lot of youth see themselves in these positions, so they don't force themselves to have these conversations or initiate those conversations among their peers because they don't see anyone like them doing that. So it might be a little bit uncalled for, but I think especially in these spaces a lot of times I sort of get sort of like a white savior-esque vibe, and I think that's what strays a lot of youth away from really taking the time to like analyze what's going on in their communities and how they can be the forefront of change instead of just responding to other people initiating that change. I don't know if you guys experience the same thing or not.
I 100% agree. I think that I've noticed that even though I or people like me might be the ones who have the story to tell, who might have like the right experience to get the message across, the message is immediately stopped with them. But if someone like their white counterpart takes their message on their behalf and tries to push it along, it often goes much farther, excuse me. And I think that that's a huge problem, and I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, yeah, thank you, Aisha. That was a really good question. I think it plays into the fact that as a whole, allyship is very important for pushing movements forward, and for a lot of movements that have existed that exist right now. In order to get into the room where the talk is happening, you need that ally that fits that either white savior or whatever look that you need in order to get your the topic talked about. But I think it comes to a point when you don't know if this ally is trying to take over and take control of it, when the voices who are immediately affected are no longer heard. I think, yeah, it all plays into that.
Yeah, and I would really quickly want to add something on before we move to the next section. Uh, but I also think that it's because there's a history of stereotyping Black communities, which can lead to a lot of people constantly talking about us, but instead of listening to us when we have issues. And I think that our conversations become very abstract and we have a lot of headlines instead of people examining humanity towards us.